Hi, welcome to your video lesson about perfect squares and square roots. Well, this is a two-part lesson, so let's start with the first part, perfect squares. Now we're thinking perfect squares here. Perfect squares are the product of a number multiplied by itself. Okay, well, what's 2 multiplied by itself? Well, if we do 2, then multiply it by 2, what do you get? Of course, you get 4. What about 3? Well, you multiply that by itself, which is 3 times 3. And what's 3 times 3? Yeah, 9. 4 times 4, of course, is 16. And 5 times 5 is, of course, 25. Now, perfect squares are these results here. 4 is a perfect square, 9 is a perfect square, 16 is a perfect square, and 25 is a perfect square. Then I have the rest of the perfect squares all the way up to 20 here for you, so you can pause and write them down in your notes. But perfect squares are just the result when you multiply a number times itself. Pretty simple, right? Well, that leads us into square roots. Okay. A root, that's a new word. Well, a square root is really just the opposite of what we just did. A square root is a number that, when multiplied by itself, results in the number we started with. So, for instance, you start with 36. Well, what's the square root of 36? Well, the first thing you need to know is that the square root is going to be asked with a funky little character. And it looks like a big division sign with a tail on it. This is the sign for a root. Now, if there's nothing here, we assume that it's a square root. We'll get into the other kinds of roots later, but right now this is square root. So what's the square root of 36? Well, think about it. What times itself gives you 36? Well, it's not 1, because that's 1. It's not 2 or 3 or 4 or 5. If you look back at your notes, you'll see that the square root of 36 is 6. Well, what's the square root of 4? What times itself is 4? Easy. 2. What's the square root of 9? What times itself is 9? Another easy one. 3. It's just the opposite of what you started with. Square root is the opposite of perfect square. Perfect square is you multiply the same number times itself, and that gives you the perfect square. If you have any questions, please feel free to ask them in class tomorrow.